Alright, pretend you have a friend, and they say, hey, I drew this, what do you think? It's beautiful, right? Look at these nice colors. These flowers look soft and inviting, and the fawn looks cuddly. It's terribly nice drawing, and you'd be good to congratulate them. It must have taken forever for all these petals. But then they say, thanks. I actually drew a few more. Alright, axiom. Animation is incredible. You kind of need to agree with me on this or else we're not going to get anywhere in this video. So all aboard, you need to get on this train now. We grow up with incredible animation and take it for granted. Animation makes itself look easy, and it's not. Trying to make your own immediately shows you how much we should appreciate it. Seriously, sit down and try and animate someone walking on a white background, and suddenly every cartoon becomes a Herculean feat. A good drawing is impressive. Now make it move, and make it fluid and with character, and make it talk and express emotion. Animating is endlessly fascinating, and we should all be more grateful for it. In summary, all animation is impressive, good animation is astonishing. With that in mind, 20 years ago, in 2019, I stumbled on this article by Bilge Ebbury. Well, the actual webpage is down, probably lost in the servers in the war, but I have a saved copy because I'm like that. The article told of a fascinating film I hadn't heard anyone else talk about called The Thief and the Cobbler. 3 claims in it really caught my attention. Claim number 1. It looks like people died making this film. Yeah. Claim number 2. This film had the longest animation production in history at 28 years. It still does. And this wasn't a film that was picked up and dropped over and over again out of laziness. This is the fascinating story of someone waylaid by Oscar-winning masterpieces and was going over budget on proof of concepts for Saudi Arabian princes. It's bananas. And the third claim was the most interesting. As a matter of fact, it was the reason I read the article, because it was the title. The greatest movie that never was. This was strange to me because... how do I put this? I had definitely seen this movie. I grew up with it. I had it on VHS. I used to watch it repeatedly. I just hadn't thought about it in years because no one else mentioned it. It got sorted away into the surrealist part of my brain that stores the Beatles, Yellow Submarine, the Spy Kids franchise, and those Thumb Henchmen, and my fever dreams. Here visualized with the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. So what did it mean it never was? In 1962, a driven man named Richard Williams began production on a film named The Misadventures of Nasr ad-Din, which after many, many title changes would become The Thief and the Cobbler. You may know him as the animator of Prologue and the landmark Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I'm sure given the few seconds you've seen on screen, you would agree with me that he was terribly good at what he did. I mean, look at this! This man's animation team has created advertisements of higher animation quality than most films. But here's the mind-boggling part. All this incredible work was created as a means of financing his dream project, The Thief and the Cobbler. Amidst all that beauty, Williams and his team were working tirelessly on what he considered his masterpiece. And I do mean the original meaning of the term masterpiece.
When you master a medium, in the old days, if you were a master painter, then you did your masterpiece. Well, this is an old-fashioned that I've mastered this medium at last. And I'm going to do a masterpiece, I hope, if I can ever finish the thing.
He didn't.
Look, this is great. Here he is accepting his second Oscar for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He ended his speech with this.
Thanks. The best is yet to come.
I'm no expert, but anyone willing to say that there clearly has something planned. Now, the behind-the-scenes production of this film is covered in depth by the documentary Persistence of Vision. It contains a lot of interviews and footage that helps to understand this bizarre film, and best of all, its director, Kevin Shriek, put a whole bunch of incredibly useful footage on the second DVD, including the full work print, which I appreciate tremendously. Kevin, you're a hero, thank you. The truth is, I don't want to talk about the years of production of this film, because it is covered well in this documentary. I'll only use it occasionally to admire the film itself, and more importantly, I find it tragic, and if I think about it too hard, I'll cry. Anyway, the important thing is that the unfinished film was seized from his studio in 1992, and the team never got to finish it. But half a century later, after the dust had settled, a miracle happened. In spite of copyright and Warner Brothers, a man named Gilchrist released an incredible fan recut of the film called The Recobbled Cut, which is effectively the definitive edition. It's a collaboration using all the footage from the original work print and some special contraband provided by the animators who worked on it, including these wonderful people. This is the version of the film that I'll be showing here for the most part because it is far more complete than the work print, makes a somewhat coherent whole, and improves the soundscape tremendously. Let me say 2 things now. The Recobbled Cut has been one of my favorite fan projects for years, and more importantly, The Thief and the Cobbler is my favorite unfinished film of all time. Yeah, that's right, I have a favorite. Get out. This is for some unfair reasons, including the fact that this film is way more complete than most any other, even though it will occasionally look like this. The Recobbled Cut is mostly complete. Williams claimed it was missing 15 minutes of animation when it was taken from him, so as you are watching the film, it will occasionally dip into black and white, or older footage, uncolored keyframes, or whatever's happening here. But the vast majority is finished, gorgeous animation, and even the storyboarding is incredible, which is a really inefficient way to make your movie. The film is, at its heart, a love letter to the Ottoman Persian art style that inspired it. The whole film is steeped in this utterly unique style that I've never seen before. I recognize that I should probably try and explain the plot here, but I don't really need to. It's so ridiculously simple it's almost impressive. Things happen. There are two characters, the thief and the cobbler, who find themselves tied up in the affairs of Baghdad. Both literally stumble into any semblance of plot progression. There's a princess, there's a vague adventure, a betrayal, an antagonistic antagonist, and a final battle of sorts which I'll get to. Get excited, it's a trip. I'll talk more about the story later, but for now that's all you need to know. And if you feel as though the things on screen seem bizarre and unrelated, you got it. The best way to actually understand this film is to understand this quote.
I think Dick looked at things that if it was harder to do, then he wanted to do it that way. It's just the more pain and energy that was involved in doing it, it would get you something. It would yield you something special on the screen that the other people weren't doing.
If a scene would work out nicely, he'd just make it longer. I think The Dying Soldier started off as a 15-second shot or something, then turned into a 20-second shot, then 30 seconds, and ended up a minute long. And it's one of those things where he would see the line test and say, this is just too nice to stop it here, and then extend it. And that happened to many scenes.
Every frame in this film was drawn by hand, drawn on ones, 22 frames a second, on paper! No help for 3D objects, not a frame of computer-assisted animation, allowing poorly aged early 2000s 3D computer effects. Sorry, Atlantis, I love you, but I'm right. Just look at the background of this shot. It's astonishing. It's not even important. It's just sitting there. Here's a shot of the thief crashing through two windows in a beautiful stained glass mosque, and that's for 2 seconds. Let's look at that 2 seconds again. It's beautiful. You can see him enter, the glass shatters, people move below, and you can see his reflection on the floor. And that's for 2 seconds. Here's a dramatic zoom from the mouth of the Sultan to the curvature of the planet. Every single shot in this film is a marvel, and it's exhausting to consider the talent and time it took. Here, let me introduce you to the best character in this film and the perfect expression of this animation. Zigzag. Zigzag is great. Every time he's on screen, you can't stop watching him. He's a slimy villain, and he works as the worm tongue to the Sultan's King Theoden. But more importantly, he speaks in rhyme, and he's voiced by Vincent Price.
O greatest king of all the earth, this low-born cobbler of no worth attacked me in the square today. Shall we take his head away?
Perfection.
He's effectively Jafar and Genie's baby, and he could take Jafar in a fight any day. He crackles, he pops, he commands every scene he's in, and he's the most perfect snake imaginable. Hop off, Jafar! His motions are fluid and disgusting. Just look how expressive his face is in this scene. Okay, quiz time. Pay attention. I'm going to give you 5 seconds of animation to answer this question. What is particularly inhuman about Zigzag?
I have power over people, though they may appear complex.
Alright, what was it? Here, let me help. Look at his hands.
And he's got several joints. He's got extra fingers. And you'll see on the animation, it's 25 rings on each hand. And he moves like a puppet.
It's no secret that hands are difficult to draw. They're geometrically complex, they're surprisingly unique from person to person, and if you've gotten to the point of not throwing a tantrum every time you have to draw them in still life, they're incredibly time-consuming in animation, which is why most cartoon characters have 4 fingers. Williams, knowing this, thought carefully and said, alright, I have 2 incredible ideas. Let's give Zigzag 14 extra knuckles, and let's make a location in the film a literal mountain of hands. Oh my God! The entire film is filled with stuff like this, things that are endlessly impressive to other animators and mean nothing to the common viewer. Every single shot of this mountain is covered in beautiful hands. It's the animation equivalent of making your decorative fountain exclusively pump cobra venom. Because it's expensive. At this point, I imagine you asking a valid question. Is this film only impressive animation? Does it have any other merits, or is it just visual delight? To which I answer... yeah, it's mostly visual delight, which means I'm not going to be talking about the character psychology of Princess Yum Yum. But this doesn't mean I'm just going to stick with this was hard to draw. This film is unlike anything else in the world, but I'm willing to admit that it's all basically under the umbrella of perfectionist animation. Here, look at the shot of the thief failing to tightrope to steal the 3 golden balls. I could talk about the attention to gravity and the weight in this, but let me simplify the result. I find it incredibly funny. This film is the most expensive Looney Tunes short that has ever been made. The ratio of it to the original Warner Brothers shorts is basically what The Lord of the Rings was to The Hobbit. It's grander and stranger, but it's certainly the same world. Look, physical comedy is hard, and I'm the sort of person who finds every twitch of John Cleese's movements funny, so this is incredible to me. Yes, the background of these shots makes my head spin, but it's funny to watch someone flail frantically to climb a drain pipe. Yeah, fluid movements, yada yada yada, but it's all in service to demonstrate a frantic patheticness. It's fantastic. Here's my favorite example of this. The loudest my theater laughed at the original Avengers film was this magical moment when Hulk and Loki met. It's a great moment. It has a lot to do with Loki and how much we've been waiting for this moment, but mostly this is just perfect visual slapstick timing. Now, let me show you the first time we meet the thief. It's magical. I still can't watch this without laughing. I would argue the scene is infinitely better because of the misdirection of the victim and the sheer length of how long this woman reduces the thief to a hopping pretzel. Also, something about the thief being grabbed by the throat and repeatedly smashed to the ground is great. It's refreshing to see this tier of quality donated to the simple pursuit of making someone laugh. Just to be clear, we still only have one axiom. Whether or not you think physical comedy is funny, it isn't mandatory to appreciate this film. There are many other things. You can absolutely be a cloutless puddle of a person and still appreciate the animation. But the slapstick helps explain why this film remains so unknown. The visuals serve humor long before it cares about story. Look, the thief took minutes to get up into this tower, and it's all used as the setup for him to flush himself down the toilet. It deliberately eschews story sense and makes the plot difficult to discuss because many of the most memorable parts of this film contribute nothing to the story. It's usually only animation buffs that know this film exists, and it can be difficult to use simple statements like, "Hey, wasn't it funny when the thief flushed himself down the toilet and fell in the sewer?" That produced a hearty chuckle from me. So watch this film while being in touch with your inner child if you can, and your inner master animator at the same time. Alright, I've been flipping about the plot, but I should actually give the spine of this to explain the majesty that is the final battle. Once upon a time, a city is protected by 3 golden balls, at least according to a prophecy. The cobbler falls, drops attack, and is arrested by Zigzag, but is hired to fix Princess Yum Yum's shoe. The thief attempts to steal everything, all the time, including the 3 golden balls. He drops them and Zigzag gets his hands on them. He attempts to trade them for the hand of Princess Yum Yum in marriage. The Sultan goes ape. Never! So Zigzag leaves and offers them instead to the most villainous villain ever, King One-Eye, in return for the princess once they conquer Baghdad. The king sends the cobbler and the princess to go find the balls, or advice, or something. I don't know. This is halfway through the movie. They find desert ruffians and gain prophecy from this bizarre witch in a mountain of hands, and they turn around and come to the kingdom to find the kingdom is being attacked by an army headed by this war machine. It's the stuff of nightmares. This is what Lucifer's Rebellion in Paradise Lost should look like. This is like Dolly and H.R. Geiger designed the Siege of Minas Tirith. Something about this monstrous thing just flicking back and forth between finished and unfinished blueprints makes it even scarier on the screen for me. It's a eldritch horror kind of thing. The armies of King One-Eye are conscious cogs in this dreadful machine. The cobbler arrives, fires one tack at the machine, and it causes a falling domino effect of destruction, which ends up taking the whole thing down in flames.
I can't believe you've done this.
Most impressively, the thief goes inside and is really just using all his Buster Keaton skills to not get killed. This scene is absolutely bonkers destruction, and the animation goes on for 10 minutes. It's probably a high point in cinema history for animation excess and skill. There is so much death. It's ridiculous. Imagine the world's largest Rube Goldberg machine, but it's built by Andrew Jackson. It's both the best and worst part of the film. On one hand, these shots are both funny, terrifying, and breathtaking, and I've never seen animated machinery like this in animation, let alone hand-drawn. But on the other hand, half of these are too complex for the human eye to even understand, and don't seem interested in communicating anything to the viewer. And having 10 minutes of red and black like this on your eyes is tiring. This scene, more strikingly than anything else, really demonstrates how the film was considered in individual shots rather than scenes. Because the thief basically just goes into a frame and then is thrown into another frame. Any semblance of rhyme or reason was abandoned a long time ago. I want to talk about one last thing in the scene though, but I'll quote a man who certainly does have the education about animation, Richard Williams.
It's capable of doing anything. See, anything you draw or can make a sound for, anything you can conceive, if you can actually paint it or draw it, you can put it on film, animated film. So it's far more appealing to me than live-action film, where it's all stuck with reality.
Animation does things that live action struggles with. Let's give an example. Weta Digital was the best in the business when the final Jackson Hobbit film was released, but this footage of Legolas jumping on falling rebels is really struggling to read correctly to me in a dramatic moment. But you know, as a cartoon, this shot of the thief walking up fallen rubble is, well, I mean, it's played comedically, but it's great. It reads so much better. And this isn't even the best example of this in the film. The best example is the Escher chase. The thief has stolen the princess's shoe, so the cobbler gives chase, and what a chase it is. I'm so upset we don't get to see this kind of thing more in animation. Look at the motion here. It's straight Escher. It really captures the imagination that the Sultan's palace would look like this. It plays with perspective. It's a playful interaction between what the viewer sees and the world the animation is living in. I just love that this short scene feels like William trying to educate the world on what animation can do if we stop aiming for realism and start playing with it. Alright, so these priorities I'm describing, from this surreal chase scene to the machine to Hand Mountain, are all spiraling closer and closer to the real reason that Williams lost the film, why no one talks about it, and how I managed to watch it as a child. Williams' priorities made things go horribly wrong in production, and these problems aren't just behind closed curtains, they're on screen. There's still some elements in this film that don't make any sense unless you know the history, so thank goodness I'm here! What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? For exactly one scene in this film, Princess Yum Yum suddenly splits into two people taking a bath. This is prompted by nothing and never happens again. It took me years to find this clip of William saying this in a random question and answer.
Some very good stuff had to go. We had a great animator, Emery Hawkins, that did we had a beast that, the princess had a twin, and this beast was in love with her.
It doesn't make sense, but whatever. Zigzag is the only character to speak in rhyme throughout the story. This is fine because he's such an amazing character, but it feels especially odd next to two mute characters. He feels like he's visiting from another film. The answer to this is way weirder than I expected. It turns out that Williams' second wife was rewriting the script to be in verse, but they only finished it for Vincent Price's lines. I like this clip because you can see the exasperation in his face while he's explaining. This final one is the weirdest and helps explain best why the film was seized. A good 50 minutes into the film, the thief moves into a dark room and tries to steal a jewel. As with all actions of the thief, this is due to the complex and subtle yearning of his desire to steal things because he is a thief. But the animation suddenly becomes Hanna-Barbera. It was clearly done as one of the first animations in the film. I imagine it's a refugee from before the copyright purge of 1970, which apparently took away a nearly completed film. It works as a proof of concept, I suppose, but it's the only part in this entire film that looks this much worse than the rest of the film.
Tom, let go of it. Let go of the pickle.
But I want a pickle.
It's included in the recobbled cut because it leads into a nice, well-animated section when the guards attempt to cut off his arms for his crime. Like most things in the film, it is both utterly insignificant to the plot but manages to last an enormous amount of screen time. I do think that Williams would have redone this scene before letting go of it. But in 1992, this scene was still in the work print that the studio saw. Especially when compared to the quality of the rest of the film, it looks like it was made 30 years ago, here visualized with the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. I know the 90s were forever ago, but remember that The Lion King was within months of this. If you compare these two films, it's kinda ridiculous. Now perhaps you'll agree with me that the art style of The Thief and the Cobbler is timeless and beautiful, but Lion King has depth of field. See how things in the background are blurry like a camera? And it also has Scar, a Shakespearean drama template, Timon and Guildenstern, Scar, wonderful animals, catchy musical numbers, Scar, James Earl Vader, Scar, and Scar.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
My point is that it has some stiff competition, and Warner Brothers knew that the public, having just seen Beauty and the Beast, would be unresponsive to this. So yeah, if I'm an executive and I'm seeing this unfinished film in front of me with a deliberate lack of crowd-pleasing elements, and suddenly in the middle of it, the thief walks into a dark room and starts looking like Yogi Bear, I'd be beyond worried. They'd had nearly 30 years to work on this, and suddenly a character's proof of concept is in the middle? Imagine if the intro scene to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was in the exact middle of the film, and for some reason you had a body double for Harrison Ford doing it. My point is that the film was not in a coherent state when the production was seized from Williams in '92. This is because Williams is the anti-Pixar and didn't want to script or storyboard.
Dick started to storyboard the movie at the end of the movie, which is an unusual way of doing it.
What? What is finished and unfinished in the recobbled cut is sporadic. It still makes no sense to me. I mean, these machine shots are finished, but why not the climax with the thief? Imagine being an animator on this film working 60-hour weeks and you realize that your boss doesn't like storyboarding and you just want to raise your hand and say, hey, what if we don't make the mountain entirely out of hands? Looking at the final product and considering the time, money, and budget, I'm only saying that there are few films in the history of cinema that offer more reason to seize it from the original creators. So yes, the film was taken from Williams' team and was given to a new one headed by a man named Fred Calvert. Technically there were several, but for now, Calvert's that guy. The main version was released in theaters in 1993 under the name Arabian Night. And this was the film I saw on VHS as a child. And this isn't even the answer to our mystery. This is where things get really interesting. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call this particular home release the Miramax version, but it's technically one of two, so keep in mind here that there was another called The Princess and the Cobbler that we're going to come back to later. The original animators interviewed in the doc were understandably horrified with this new version.
Yeah, I was heartbroken, because it was just a mess, basically.
And yes, I don't necessarily recommend this version of the film, but I will instead defend it. Now let's look at the big picture. The simplest way to tell the story is to say that Williams was a creative genius who had his baby stolen from him and was released in a broken state by faceless businessmen, but I want to fight this. There's a more honest understanding that's way more interesting. It just takes something video essays have little history with: human compassion and patience. Yes, Williams and his team had their work taken. I have said why I at least understand why this happened. Calvert and his animators were given this, and to be put in this position, to be handed this work print and to be told to make it a finished box office family-friendly film is the worst job, with the exception of Fire Festival organizer. Yeah, that's right, we do retro comedy. Look it up. You're given some of the most incredible hand-drawn animation ever created, and you have to finish it. And it's not like finish these 3 scenes, it's like, hey, finish up sporadic spurts of 7-second animation that's broken. Oh, and add character and plot while you're at it. You have to animate better than most people on Earth just to not look horribly out of place next to Williams' work, and you have no time to do this. And you know what? For the truly impossible position they were put in, the fact that I'm not physically uncomfortable watching it flick back and forth between Williams and Calvert's team is commendable. Though if you're looking out for it, you'll definitely see the difference. Anytime the animation suddenly zooms into a face and the lip syncing gets a little weird, you're definitely watching an added scene. Also, anytime the cobbler is talking.
Why can't I ever talk when it matters?
Yeah, he talks now. To make this film economically viable, several liberties were taken. The cobbler is given the gentle voice of Matthew Broderick.
As Zigzag's guards were taking me inside the royal palace, I gazed upon the princess for the first time.
And hey, it's Simba. It's fine. He's got a pleasant voice. It's better than Harrison Ford's Blade Runner monologue.
I don't know why he saved my life.
But the thief... yeah, the thief's weird. Alright, look at this character's movements and designs. He looks like Gollum Swamp Yoda. All his movements are slimy and crafty. You'd imagine he'd sound high-pitched, like a Muppet, right?
Wrong!
They gave him the deep internal monologue of Jonathan Winters.
A man of few words, but many thoughts.
Good morning, Arabia. I've had my coffee, I've read the paper. Now it's time to get to work.
It's not ideal.
No, why, it's bananas.
I grew up with it and it still feels strange with me. Everyone talks all the time.
Coming through. Woman with a baby.
Babies don't go clang.
They often have snarky commentary about the events happening around them.
Hey, 2 trees on the ledge of an impossible to climb cliff. Perfect.
This all contributes to a feeling that the words you hear aren't actually coming from the characters, but rather from voice actors that are staring at the same screen you are.
Rule number 1, keep your eye on the wire and have feet like a monkey.
It's something closer to Mystery Science Theater than desirable. It follows the same beats when you put them side by side.
Hey, that shower wasn't bad. I've been afraid of it all these years.
Soap. Oh, so that's what it looks like. I've heard of it in storybooks and songs.
Now, this isn't great, but let's take a moment to make a distinction here. This isn't as disrespectful as it may seem right now. I know this seems bleak, but let me make a distinction by comparing this with the animation that is eerily similar to this film. I'm sure you've been thinking of it. Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories is an anime from 2000 that has a unique claim to fame. It's comedic English dubbing.
Drop the Krispy Kreme, Serpico! We need your help here!
Does my house look like my father and my brother after 9 months?
Yeah, diggity.
It was confirmed in 2007 that the dubbing company was given the original show and was asked to do whatever you think will make the show sell. This created a show in which the humor is mainly derived from hearing the voice actors either blatantly insult the show...
Run, Satsuki! Run from yet another Japanese horror movie knockoff! Run!
Or just amuse themselves.
Your father always thinks it's so cute to cross his eyes in pictures. See, look, he did it there.
Leo, when will the sun go down on me?
This show is a dub which was made without interest in respecting the source material. The Thief and the Cobbler is different. The dubbing shares many similarities. It's certainly playful, but it doesn't ridicule the source material like Ghost Stories. It's just trying to do something difficult. The dubbing is trying to create a conventionally comedic film more in line with Mickey's Hercules and The Emperor's New Groove, so like them, it's uninterested in being period accurate.
Attention passengers, the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Nobody lives like this except college kids. Whatever happened to badminton?
Which is a shame because the film is, as I said, a love letter to this style of art. Respect is an important part of the original formula. It's just so intense a tonal clash between the visuals and the audio that it makes sense to say, wow, Calvert didn't care at all, when actual quotes from Calvert show otherwise. I just feel sorry for him. Animation is difficult and this job was impossible. You can see the difference in attitude. Ghost Stories was the last-ditch salvage job. Thief and the Cobblers was the Saving Private Ryan of animation. I have nothing but empathy for the studio's predicament. Let me add a final element here to demonstrate my point about Calvert not being the villain here. Calvert's work is not synonymous with the Miramax version. Technically, the version he completed was released as the first of the two releases I mentioned, The Princess and the Cobbler, which was only released in South Africa and Australia under the Allied filmmakers. Miramax took this foundation and added to it without his involvement, so Calvert didn't add the thief's voice, that was Miramax. Strangely enough, I actually had seen this version as a child as well. I was living with my South African cousins, and I distinctly remember watching this on video and being confused as to why the thief wasn't talking. I thought someone had messed with the TV because I was 6. I won't talk much about this version because historically it's a weird middle ground between the fascinating time capsule of Miramax's tinkering and the pure recobbled cut. But let me say, the Cobbler's voice is different.
I saw the princess. I had never seen anyone so beautiful.
King One-Eye is killed differently, so every version of this film has a different death for its antagonist. And the credit sequence has a lot of footage that was unusable for the film, and I just think it's sweet that he puts it in here. But back to the Miramax. I've admitted that I grew up with it, and I know it's misguided, but I do like it when friends talk during movies, so it makes me laugh at times.
It's not my fault. I didn't do it. I'll be going now. Duck and cover. Duck and cover. Out of the way, Bonnie.
Alright, I can't believe I have to say this, but the voices aren't even the biggest change made to the Miramax cut. They added 3 entirely new musical numbers. I'm going to need you to think about that. Imagine if someone was handed the animation for Frozen or something and was like, hey, I need you to add the songs to the parts in between the movie. That was done to these poor people in spite of the word and spirit of the Geneva Conventions.
We're what happens when you don't finish school. We're what happens when you don't finish school.
So yeah, they're not great. Technically, they're all 3 made by different studios, but it gets really difficult to say who was responsible for what because failure is an orphan. See, songs can be pleasant, but they regularly carry a lot of weight in musical theater and storytelling. They can help move the plot along. In montage, you can hear a character's thoughts, and sometimes they can do both! There are more, but these are just examples we're going to look at for the purposes of this film. Let's look now at some examples of when a song is used effectively. Here's Gaston. He has no army. He sings a song.
He's dead! Good and dead!
Army. This is Scar. He has nothing. He does a song, he does a little dance, army, and castle. This is Ilsa. She's all alone. She sings a song, she does a dance, now she has a castle. And billions in merchandising sales, and what is it, like 7 sequels now? The Thief and the Cobbler, by adding these songs as the last step, has a problem because nothing happens in them. So here's the princess meeting the brigands, they sing a song, and we're literally back to the same shot. But hey, there's still hope. There are other reasons you'd have a song, and the second is a way more important reason. It can do what Shakespeare did with soliloquy. We can explore into a character's psyche. And that's fascinating too. We can find out more about what our characters want while listening to a catchy tune. Look, the Hunchback of Notre Dame's Frollo isn't building a single army or castle here, but we get to see inside his head, and he is really coming up short of handling his lust for Esmeralda. The other 2 songs in the film attempt to fit into this category, but they're doomed. The Cobbler and the Princess have a song about how in love they are from afar.
Am I feeling love? It's just a greasy spoon.
I don't know, I think SpongeBob did it better. This problem reaches peak absurdity with my favorite of the 3 songs, the princess's solo song. She sings a song about being more than just a princess to be kept inside. Now, there is precedence for this. It's common near a film's opening to have a character sing a grand statement about what they want. This is called the I Want song, and I'm sure you have your favorite. The Mickey Corporation did it 50 times and then parodied it in Wreck-It Ralph 2.
What works for some of us is finding a form of water and staring at it.
What?
This is where you get your wants. You want to be king, you want adventure, you want to be outside for just one day, you want your bananas back! So Princess Yum Yum, being the protagonist apparently, what are you 2 doing here? Get out, shoo! Is singing about being more than just what the world expects of her. It's not necessarily clear what she wants to be, but there's a distinct yearning to not be exactly what Richard Williams drew her to be, a stock, sexy princess lady. I'd love to believe that these lyrics are almost self-aware and ridiculing themselves, but don't bet on it. It's all a bit unfortunate because this is a female character as written by Richard Williams during yet another failed siege in his never-ending war against the female waistline. I mean, come on! Anyway, my point is that Princess Yum Yum doesn't have a character because her creator was not interested in her having one. So yeah, I personally think this song is pretty, but it's a failed offensive in a doomed war. Alright, enough about these songs, more changes. They did good work to try and set up the stakes at the beginning of the film better with a voiceover from the cobbler. They also tried to lay out what plot there was with murals on the walls, which I think was a creative solution, so you don't have to animate as much. Whenever a character's mouth isn't moving on screen, they're often talking to themselves about the plot.
That cobbler, there's something about him.
Halt, in the name of King Nod!
They animated new parts so that characters would often view each other from great distances to trick the viewer into thinking that they had some semblance with each other, which they don't. And also, the film is drowned in excessive stock sound effects to make the proceedings goofier.
Naughty.
They completely removed the witch's long fortune-telling scene. She's now just a smoke cloud. The fantastic destruction of King One-Eye's war machine is cut down considerably. Minutes of the destruction are lost. A lot of the funnier deaths are removed, so I mean, what's even the point? Lame. There's one thing I don't want to talk about, but I feel like it would be irresponsible not to. The palace servants in the recobbled cut are not purple. Their skin is black and their lips are bigger. I'm not showing it because it's my video and you can't make me, but let me wrap up by saying that I don't understand why this is the case. I do not want to do any more research on it because it's miserable, and I thought I should warn you. This is the same thing they did with Jinx and Pokemon. Moving on. The ending to the thief's imposed story arc is way less funny now because the thief does the right thing. It's lame. The original conclusion Williams wanted was, even in a storyboard form, hilarious. The thief basically just decided he's had enough of this.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
This is the last time we see the thief until the last shot in the film where he steals the film itself, which is actually Zigzag's job. But this wasn't good enough for Miramax. I can't even describe what this ending is, you just have to see it.
Oh, and as for the thief, he spent years in jail. But when he learned his lesson, the king made him head of palace security, and even agreed to let him take one last thing.
I shouldn't steal again, but maybe...
They freeze frame a photo and it feels like the end of an 80s cartoon where the creators would apologize to the Reagan administration for making a 20-minute toy commercial by making a very clear moral lesson at the end of the episode.
Telling them what's wrong is the first step toward making things right.
But it doesn't work. This last scene is among the worst things ever. This came out in theaters and was demolished at the box office. I can't think of...
I forgot about Aladdin!
Aladdin exists. Aladdin is also a fantastic film. Look at this graph comparing the box office. That's The Thief and the Cobbler. It's not difficult to recognize that these films are similar, and that one was considerably firster than the other. I'm not interested in talking about how Aladdin was influenced by The Thief and the Cobbler, because that would take a long time. But because I'm talking about The Thief and the Cobbler, I am kind of fascinated in how the success of Aladdin influenced the Miramax release. It's an utterly unique situation where a cut of a film mimics a film that had been mimicking another unfinished cut. It's a real echo chamber. You can see now why a lot of the Miramax changes exist. The jokes are uninterested in cultural or time period accurate jokes, the princess is now considerably more Jasmine, the movie has songs, and the Miramax has this weird chip on its shoulder all the time.
I'm going to Disneyland.
Who needs a genie when a tack will do the trick?
I think, if anything, the funniest thing about this is that this is the second time in 5 years that Mickey asked Matthew Broderick to participate in one of these heists. If you're interested, go look up the similarities of The Lion King and Japan's Kimba the White Lion. But anyway, the most important difference between Williams and Mickey's approach to a similar Middle Eastern source was what they saw in the material they were adapting. Aladdin saw a cosmetic framework for which to apply one of their proven story structures, e.g. Macbeth, but in space. Williams is adapting a specific art style, which I think is, as all art styles, a product of a culture, shaped but ultimately separate from the real culture of the Middle East, as, say, Dr. Seuss is to America or Charles Dickens is to Britain. Certainly they reflect an element of these places and they influence culture, but they're not synonymous. Mickey visited a place and decided to create an unspecified amalgam of several places. William researched an art style and decided to live there. This is from the same team that mimicked historic political cartoons, classic Warner Brothers, and Dickens illustrations. This comparison is generalized, and I recognize that it also begs for a comparison of the cultural respect these two films have for the place and the people, but unfortunately I lack the education to do this correctly. I attempted to research it and found that it added 12 minutes to the video and gave me more questions than answers, so that's another video. But there are intersections between the subject and the animation that still flummoxes me, like, what's going on with the cobbler's ethnicity? Like, really? He looks like Buster Keaton here, but this is Baghdad. He looks ethnically Arabic in some shots. Is he ethnically Kurdish? Is this just when he's outside? No, there are exceptions. Is he supposed to be getting a tan? Is that really my best guess? Alright, let's wrap this up. Today, both the recobbled and Miramax release of this film are unknown. The film didn't get any love after an abysmal DVD release and has never released to any streaming service. The Miramax release presents itself like a cheap knockoff of Aladdin, which it wasn't, and the recobbled, well, I think you can see why the recobbled cut isn't popular.
Even though it should be.
One final film comparison before we're done. Director Francis Ford Coppola once famously said of his work Apocalypse Now, "My film is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam." It's a good explanation for what makes it so fantastic. His directorial suffering translated perfectly to the framework of Conrad's original novella and the Vietnam War. The film worked. War is an expression of extreme human suffering and effort, yet animation is by its nature a medium that makes long effort seem effortless. Wartime live action somehow benefited from this misery. These poor animators suffered in silence, and a suffering that is so much dorkier and uncinematic, but lasted for decades. In conclusion, The Thief and the Cobbler is a fascinating project that sits in my mind as a spectacle to witness rather than a film to understand. And here's a bizarre thought. Even in a world where this film was finished, if any amount of time would have possibly satisfied Williams, I think the final product would have still felt alien and off-putting to a general audience, and I wouldn't blame the audience for this. Don't get me wrong, this film deserved critical acclaim, and for a moment in time many would have praised the artistry, discussions would revolve over whether the audiences of the time would appreciate the silent era comedy, they'd be intrigued, and then a year later it would probably fade from memory. Because people don't remember spectacle, they remember characters and themes and questions and a good story. I love this film, and it's a shame it got copied, but at the end of the day, Aladdin is about things. It has larger themes and lessons. This film lacks a healthy amount of characters, larger themes, arcs, and suspense. Put simply, it isn't saying anything. It lacks the aspects of an epic that the visuals, all this gorgeous, eye-watering animation, should really be in service to. So, I do love this film, as I've said. Nothing looks like this, nothing flows and moves like this, but this film is also my secret weapon, my argument whenever I consider what happens when a story stops considering a larger message and theme. This is a cautionary tale of what happens when the means of expressing a story visually entirely overwhelm the purpose of storytelling. Watching the recobbled cut today feels like walking in an abandoned church, a place once filled with endless love and reverence, overgrown with weeds and disrepair. There's something forbidden about it, like you're not supposed to see it. There's nothing like it. Watching the unfinished work of a private perfectionist is rare. It's why Stanley Kubrick burned all his supplementary footage for his films before he died. I wish the team had been able to finish this film, but I think being incomplete actually makes the recobbled cut more interesting to watch. So yeah, I recommend The Thief and the Cobbler. You need to be in a certain mood where you can relax and just marvel at something for a while, but you owe it to yourself one night to just sit down and watch it if you can. It's out there.
And afterwards, that is directly following, I want to talk to you about something even bigger, namely Max Headroom.